Thank you so much, Arundhuti, for joining us on this for this conversation. I mean, there's just so much to talk about, but I would like to begin by talking about the fact that your second novel is now going to be in 49 languages. You've always in your work related to real life events on the ground and very disturbing happenings around you. And yet you immerse yourself in very high quality fiction. I mean, do you think that's a very rare thing for a writer, difficult?
You know, I mean, I think that people make this mistake to think that fiction is somehow untrue. Actually, good fiction has to be true, and I'm not talking about true in terms of facts and figures, but true as in music is true, you know, as you know that when you hit the right note, it is a true note. So it's an imaginary garden, surely, but it's full, its tap roots of all the plants in it come from a place which is true, you know. And so I don't know why people sort of seem to suggest that you have fiction that has to be purely imaginary and then you have non-fiction, whereas for me the line is an osmotic one, and none of what I write in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness would have been even ethical if I was just imagining massacres and lynchings and brutalization. You know, these are the things that, or caste or gender or all of it, you know, it is the substance of the air we breathe, and you know.
Coming to the substance of the air that we breathe today.
But sorry, I mean, just if I may say it,
no, please.
That, and yet fiction, literary fiction is not factual, you know, when people go around trying to say, oh, this is so and so and this is so and so, that is reductive and stupid. But the air is true, you know.
Yeah. So actually that's a very robust point. If you look at the journey that you have made and say your environs have made since the God of Small Things and the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, you see a whole arc which goes this way or goes below the earth, I don't know how. So where are we today?
Well, in a very dangerous place, you know, in a very dangerous place, because we, you know, when the massacre in Gujarat happened, I certainly was one of those people who made the mistake of believing that if you just describe what happened and if you sort of bring it out in all sorts of ways, whether it's in your outrage, whether it's in your writing, whether it's in court, whatever, you know, that would be enough to create a climate where it couldn't happen again. But in fact, you actually came up against a terrifying scenario in which there were people who said, so what? Or they deserved it. And you know, it became, in some ways, the massacre became an election campaign. It became something to be proud of. And today we have a prime minister who was chief minister at the time, who has refused ever to admit any wrongdoing or neglect. And so, you know, whether this path to power came despite the massacre or because of it is something which is a very troubling point. You know, it's a very troubling point, because we are not talking about, I mean, on the one hand, sure, there's individual accountability, and certain people murdered certain other people, certain people raped certain other people, certain people burnt certain other people. Yes, but what sort of a society is it in which this kind of thing is not abhorrent, you know? So it sets off a very complex current, and Today, of course, we've seen a situation in which you have a whole cultural configuration, a nationalist configuration, a Hindu nationalist configuration, who has risen to power on a manifesto of hatred. But now what you're seeing is when you put that kind of hatred down on the table, and you think that you can control it and say, oh, it's just between Hindus and Muslims. No, it's an idea, it's a way of thinking. And then that way of thinking can infect relationships between castes, between classes, between genders, between ethnicities. And so, this is a country where everybody is a minority in some way or the other. And once you light those fires, they may burn for 1,000 years.
Yeah. You made a very interesting point earlier and now that we've seen this kind of hatred which has been legitimized in a way through a political campaign and which is communal hatred, but we've also lived with centuries of caste violence, and which is like an everyday thing which we tolerate in one sense as a society. State sort of abolished untouchability in the constitution, but we didn't abolish caste. And there are all these and there are these symbols which still anger people when the Dalit man decides to become a bridegroom on a horse, or decides to take the name of Singh in Gujarat, because it's a Rajput name, and all sorts of things.
The thing about caste is, that when it comes to caste, the real violence is more than just the flogging and the killing, because caste itself as a social structure is a form of violence, and it can only be kept in place by the continuous threat of violence, the continuous threat. So it's an abomination that I frankly don't know how it is passed under the international radar of all kinds of outrage for so long. But it is obviously complex and simple at the same time, because it's not, in a way, casteism and racism is the same thing, but it's not just white people oppressing black people, but a system in which society is divided into not an infinite, but a finite hierarchy, levels of hierarchy, and each one is then wired into that sense of a vertical hierarchy, So it's not only those at the very top, but all the way down the line that has been indoctrinated to think in these ways, So, but the violence of caste is not just the violence of the flogging, the killings, the lynchings, the violence of caste is in its daily implementation, in its belief that certain people are entitled to less than other people, in the way democracy and elections and constituencies are configured.
And within caste, of course, the whole notion of untouchability is so abhorrent, that you have, of course, the overall segregation and exclusions. And then the fact that you can actually think of fellow humans as being so impure as to be untouchable, which is legitimized by some sections of the scriptures, So
yeah, so that's the one difference between caste and race, that race created by the human mind, and caste is, they pretended that it is sanctioned in some divine way, which makes it so hard to even overcome, because it is imbued with religious belief.
Yeah, so we had the Manual Scavenging Act passed only in 2013. I don't know why it was not passed soon after independence, because we have Article 374 which says that our law should have got constitutionalized soon after we became independent. And that's what Ambedkar said, that we are giving ourselves political independence but not economic and social equality. So
that is the problem, on all of this, that you might have a legal system, you might have laws, you might have a constitution, but you don't have, society is way behind the constitution, because obviously Ambedkar was an enlightened person, way beyond his time.
Arundhati, today, coming back to the here and now, we've had this spate of attempted arrests, and some arrests actually. We have had raids on the homes of lawyers and activists and academics. Fortunately, the Supreme Court has stepped in day before yesterday, which was very, very welcome. And one thing about that the drama of the last 3 days was, Professor Satyanarayan's comment and his Varavara Rao's daughter's comment that, the police kept asking me that why you're not wearing a sari and why don't you have sindoor in your head. How do you see this panning out? This regime, which has probably taken authoritarian fascism to its testing limit under the constitutional framework.
Well, it's gone outside the constitutional framework already, but see, the way I see things right now, that's what I was trying to say yesterday at the press conference, and is that you also know from your experience in Gujarat that the dangerous time came, and the Gujarat massacre happened at a time when the ruling party there was losing popularity, losing election. These are very dangerous times, So that is the situation right now. Surveys have shown, actual data analysis of real voting in the by-elections have shown a serious drop in approval and popularity. So two things have to be done to regain that. One is that you've got to consolidate your own constituency, and the other is that you have to obviously divide the opposition, and you have to divert attention away from the reasons why your popularity is dropping. These are the things that we are witnessing right now. So obviously, while the communal pot is kept on the boil, you have a situation that in which the disaster of demonetization, which everybody felt, but now the figures are out. The Reserve Bank has said that 99.3% of the money has come back. The papers are reporting the cash economy is larger than it ever was. Other newspapers like The Guardian have reported that it likely caused a 1% shrinkage in the GDP, that 1.5 million jobs were lost. So this is something that's affecting everybody, and particularly the poorest people, And the betrayal of a person who comes to power, an organization that comes to power promising 15 lakhs in everyone's bank account and then does demonetization, it's an outrage, that. Then the whole business of corruption, which is the basis on which the UPA fell with those 40 days of agitation and so on. Look at the Rafale deal now, the allegations are of unimaginable corruption. So the demand is by all opposition parties that there should be a joint parliamentary probe. Is that going to happen? God knows. If you look at things like, obviously the distress in the agricultural sector, you look at farmers' suicides, all of that is creating anger, which people don't have to look to newspapers to understand, because it's happening to them. It's happening to them. The TV channels don't have to tell them. Now the only thing to do is to say, oh, but all this distress is in order for the great Hindu Rashtra to come, which is a very it's not a foolish move. It's something that can sell. It could, but if you look at what is happening. I mean, during the UPA government, you had the huge attack on Adivasis in Bastar, but now the attack is on Dalits too, always disguised as action against Maoists. You know, earlier it was only Adivasis who were called Maoists, now it's also Dalits, which is an insult to assertions of Dalit pride, Dalit leadership, you know, making them out to be people who are just manipulated by this handful of urban Naxals or whatever they want to call them, you know. And but at the same time, you know, there is going to be a great wooing of that constituency, because that is 150 years old, you know, that, you know, Ghar Wapsi, it started in the 1870s, you know. So in some ways, if you look back at Gauraksha, Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, Ghar Wapsi, all these things, and they have a 150-year-old history, you know. So we are living in those times, and I have a sense that people's mood is shifting, but I mean, that means the most dangerous times, because whether this, you know, trying to drag people back into that cauldron of hatred, whether it's going to be, you know, we've seen now the police have, because of the investigation into the assassination or murder of Gauri Lankesh, you've seen those organizations being exposed, but how many more of them are there? God knows, you know, how many more of them are plotting things, and where are they plotting? Where is the fireball going to fall? You know, where is the false flag attack or the bomb blast or the killing or the lynching going to happen to roil up people's feelings? I don't know. So complicated, difficult times, challenging times, but also I think people are showing incredible humor and courage and stepping up to the plate in ways which is wonderful, you know.
And do you feel worried and scared personally at any time? Because you've had to bear the most vile attacks at different points of time in the last 10 years.
No, I mean, I don't feel, I mean, I don't allow myself to feel that, because I just think all of us are, you know, I mean, I don't want to put myself in a special category of danger, because I think everybody who speaks out, and in my case, the stakes are just higher, you know, in the sense that because, you know, because of, I mean, I don't think well, I hope nothing happens, but I don't think we should allow ourselves to be spooked by that, you know, because it is something that personally for me, I don't want to be loved by these people, so I don't mind their insults at all, you know.
Your home state recently went through a terrible, terrible flood, and this morning I saw a tweet by the State Finance Minister of Kerala saying that the Chief Minister's Relief Fund had crossed 1,000 crores, you know, of Indian donations, when you have a very, very petty central government not allowing foreign aid to come in, despite the fact that NDA-1 had allowed crores to come in for the Gujarat earthquake in 2001. How did you feel when that happened? I mean, this kind of discourse, which, I mean, this tremendous resilience from within and outside Kerala, a lot of support from the rest of India.
Well, I felt, I mean, you know, obviously it's not perfect what has happened there, because I know, I mean, from personal friends that there have been caste issues. You know, I know, like, people in my own hometown where Dalit families have a separate relief camp, and you know, money is not getting there, and so on. But on the whole, I felt like from hearing stories and from hearing, yeah, you felt like, yeah, that's the kind of place I'd like to belong to, you know, and that's the kind of place we could all belong to, if only there was a slightly more long-term idea of how things should be, because it could be a wonderful place. If people were, if it was the kind of place that a society that people wanted to belong to, people in the Northeast, people in Kashmir, it's not impossible to have a revolutionary vision of a society, because it doesn't have to get there, it has to be there. It's not, there is no society that is just anywhere in the world, but are we yearning for justice? Are we moving towards justice, or are we moving in the opposite direction? If you have a sense that people are trying, that people have a vision, that people want to move towards egalitarianism, then the imperfections and the flaws are one thing. But if you're seeing everyone in power leaning in the opposite direction, you see the elites, you see the majoritarianism, and it's all leaning in the opposite direction, then what hope is there,
A few words on the opposition today, the political opposition. I mean, we know that from the ground, we feel that the mood is changing, people are looking up, people are fighting back at various levels. The political opposition today seems to be in better shape than it was a few months ago. And there seem to be talk of alliances to make sure that this regime doesn't come back to power. How do you see that?
Well, I see that, one thing is an alliance which is based on agreement and, a common minimum program and so on. Another thing is an alliance. See, what I see now is a situation where on every side, it's a battle for survival. The BJP is going to fight for survival, because people know that if they lose, it's not just that they'll be out of power, but they could be in serious trouble, I mean, there are a lot of things building up which are disturbing and extremely worrying. For example, the death of Justice Loya, the very questionable death of Justice Loya, where is that going to end? I mean, I know the courts have thrown it out for now, but I don't think it's going to go away, Now, on the side of the opposition, I think if you take the Congress, or you take Samajwadi, or you take the BSP, I think they are fighting for their own survival, for their existence. Another 5 years of this, will they even exist anymore? So the alliance is also, their alliances are based on a kind of need to survive, which is a good thing. I believe that. I mean, I'm speaking from my experience of Kerala, for example, as opposed to West Bengal. The fact that no party has been able to consolidate itself for 40 years like the CPM did in West Bengal is a very good thing. I think even if you're like me, who has not that much faith in the goodness of governments when they come, I mean parties or the state when it comes to power, I see myself as a person who's decided to be in an oppositional space. I have criticized them all, the CPM, the Congress, everyone. So from my experience in Kerala, the fact that that state has never had a government coming back to power twice in a row. Unlike, say, the consolidation of power in West Bengal by the CPM for so many years, it creates a kind of rot, it creates an arrogance, it creates a violence. So whereas in Kerala, the CPM and the Congress have never been given that opportunity by people, which is great. And I feel that in India, even though you take someone like me who is a person who believes that I am a part of society, I'm not a part of the state. I have deliberately put myself in that oppositional space. I refuse to think like the state, right? So whoever comes to power, obviously one will be oppositional to them. But I think that today we do have to keep switching them around. We do have to never allow them to grow roots I'm quite happy with coalitions. I'm quite happy with uncertainty, compromise, debate. I mean, you can't have a situation like this again where a prime minister comes out and announces demonetization without consulting. So even let's say it had been a great success. The point is that that kind of thing is dangerous. I mean, what do people who want to invest in India think? That anything can happen at any time, right? And it's what I call a form of micro-fascism, you know. We moved from the big mobs to the micro mobs to the lynching mobs, and this kind of micro-fascism, which is also going to be administered by Aadhaar, right? Everyone's data centralized and everyone can be managed through their data. And similarly, demonetization, it was like taking a cricket bat and breaking everybody's spine. You know, that I have the power just to take the money out of your wallet, you know. So it was a kite that was flown. Can I do this? And will people react or will they not? Nobody reacted. It was early days, so nobody reacted. People had faith, which was a terrible thing. We should have reacted. We should have reacted. Equally, these arrests, it's kite flying. It's like, let me do this and see, let us do this and see what will happen. You know, it's a testing ground, you know, to take the temperature of people. And so while we must know that they already knew how we would react in terms of course there would be protests and they would wait them out. But so I believe that the opposition is going to be fighting for its survival, as is the government, as never before.
You sort of rightly flagged a couple of things in connection, that this is going to be a very challenging time. It's going to pull out our reserves in terms of creativity, resistance. Maybe we've never had a challenge like this since '77. Three or four things which have really struck me is that you have something like the Law Commission today saying that, you know, simultaneous polls is probably not a good idea. That sedition is something that should be really looked into again. We should not have 124A on our statute books. It should not be seen as questioning the government, should not be seen as sedition, which has been reiterated today. You have a debate going on as to whether there should be a cap on election expenditure. And all the opposition parties saying yes, there should be, and only the BJP is saying that there should be no limit. And then you have demonetization and what it has meant, and you have a kind of crony capitalism, which we know the way the government is favoring certain capitalists, not all capitalists even. So they have access to unlimited money in terms of elections.
Well, that is the interesting thing, that, you know, you had demonetization, you have this very, very complicated goods and services tax, which has taken the stuffing out of small businesses. And at the same time, you have the BJP emerging as by far the richest political party. It has introduced these secret electoral bonds so that political funding becomes very, very mysterious. You have, while small businesses and jobs and the GDP drops, you have certain favorite corporations who have multiplied their wealth manifold, and certain favorite businessmen who have escaped with thousands of crores of money. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer that people who have that much wealth are going to say that there should not be a cap on election expenditure, because they can just bulldoze their way through with money. They have the money, they have the EVMs, they have the voter lists. So you're up, and they have a great section of the media which has been extremely culpable in doing things, you know, for example, the media houses that played again and again and again the faked videos of the young students in JNU, Umar Khalid and Kanhaiya. Today, Umar Khalid has survived an assassination attempt. Kanhaiya was beaten up. These, I mean, they are legally culpable, surely. You know?
And in fact, the investigation by the magistrate into that video, which was shown again and again by Z, was found to be doctored.
That's what I'm saying. It was shown by Z, it was shown by Times Now, I think shown by, but whoever showed it, I mean, should they not apologize? Should they not compensate this boy who, honestly, I mean, his whole life is affected by this. His whole life, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, he has a life and he wasn't killed that day. But who's to say that it won't happen 5 days down the line? Shouldn't they be clarifying that this is not true? He didn't say these things. He's not a terrorist. He wasn't trained by ISIS. You know, he's just a student.
You know, that's very interesting what you said, because these labels that they use and misuse, that they first create and they misuse, and particularly misuse social media with, and all these electronic media channels like Tukde Gang, Urban Nakshals, stuff like they deliberately used to malign and to, like you said, consolidate their own constituencies.
Tukde Gang should be the people who are trying to divide and this country up into, you know, majorities and minorities and good Indians and bad Indians and so on. I mean, they're the ones who are going to end up dismembering the place, no?
You know, Trump came to power in America, and Modi had come to power here before that. And one of the things I keep telling people, and we have these discussions over, is that, you know, though you have America being this, we know what the American state is, its foreign policy, the war machine, all of that, but you saw huge protests both after he came to power and even when the Supreme Court of America about 2 months ago passed that horrendous judgment on migrants and their families. You had cities erupting in protest. We here have a man who, of course, represents what he did in 2002, but also symbolizes an organization like the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which will be 100 years old in 2025, which has actually attempted to restructure Indian society and state to achieve its game of a Hindu Rashtra, you know. And it's called itself a cultural organization, but it's uncapped foreign funding, all of that. And its tentacles are in society, which are now being reflected on trolls and social media. So in that sense, it's a much more dangerous scenario here than even in America.
That's true. Of course, you know, the institutions of American democracy are very, very troubled by Trump. I mean, including the army, the media, the courts, all of that. Here, institutions have been hollowed out and just their shells remain, you know. So you have those problems, whatever government comes to power next, if it is in them, even if it is in them, the institutions are all compromised, you know. So what is happening is a much deeper problem than elections can solve right now, you know. Much deeper. I mean, the compromising of all educational institutions, of textbooks, of what the young are being taught. You know, I mean, even people who believe in that ideology, they also tend to believe in sending their children to America. But we are going to lose any vestige of collective intelligence, you know.
With this kind of teaching.
Yes.
Romila Thapar and other historians say that, you know, India has always been a civilization where the Shraman has battled the Brahman for centuries. I mean, you had Buddha, you had Jain, you had the Charvakas, you had the Lokayatas. So there has always been this deeply questioning and anti-establishment tradition, which has questioned the hierarchy of caste, hierarchy of injustice, all along, and it's not a foreign concept, and therefore pluralism and diversity within the constitution is very much rooted in the soil here, much as it's been tried to be crushed. Yet we have modernity, and the way we, like you're saying, we are going back.
We have you know, everything is unique about this place, including its unique brand of fascism, you know. And of course, you know, questions have been raised for millennia, but the fact is that, you know, right now, not right now, for a long time, what has happened is that history has been turned into mythology, and mythology has been turned into history, you know. So you have a situation where, a bizarre situation, where you have people going into the forests where indigenous people live and have lived for centuries before Hinduism existed, and they are doing ghar wapsi, Okay, they are telling Adivasis that they are returning home to the Hindu fold, and yet at the same time, those same people, the Hindu evangelists, will claim that they are Aryans who came from outside, who are the descendants of Alexander. So you can say anything at any point, and so
then we have the story of Eklavya, and
you do see the fact that in many areas, in many Adivasi communities and rural communities, their deities are the demons of Hinduism, right? Including Ravan in the south, including the conquest of the Vidyans. So, and it keeps coming up. I mean, every now, like when Africans were being attacked on the streets, Tarun Vijay said, no, we are not racist because we live with all these black South Indians. Yeah. So, I think,
unique brand of racism you were talking about.
Yes, unique everything. I mean, unique beauties, unique complexities, unique pluralism. It cannot have been otherwise, because what we also take for granted is when we say India, what do we mean by it? The borders of this nation state were drawn by the British. Otherwise, they were the ones who tried to homogenize it. Otherwise, it wasn't. We were not all bound together in this. In fact, a lot of the violence of Hindutva is to try and create that majority community that never existed, to try and forcibly create a majority that never ever thought of itself as a majority earlier.
For me, Arundhuti Roy became a name when I read your essay in the Sunday magazine all those years ago on Phulan Devi, the film, Shekhar Kapoor's film, and the way you interrogated the violence there. So would you just the question of violence.
Well, it's really interesting, because that, the Great Indian Rape Trick you're talking about, that was written in, I think, 93 or something, way before I was writing The God of Small Things at the time. And, I'm just reading it now because it's going to be part of a compilation. And it's really interesting, because it raises those questions that are very moot today, questions of consent and violence and all of that. But in a very different way, in the sense that, of course, the main point I was making was that you can't restage the rape of a living woman without her consent. Because Phulan was saying that, it's like people are cheering in the halls and all that. But the other more interesting thing I think is that, Phulan Devi was India's most famous bandit. She was in the Chambal at the time and everyone else was being caught by the police. They couldn't find her, they couldn't catch her, they had never seen her. And she led a gang of dacoits and eventually she surrendered. She was never caught. They cheated her afterwards on the terms of that surrender. But the film turns this most famous bandit into history's most famous victim of rape, and starting from the beginning, like in her own telling, she became a bandit because when she was very young, I think 10 years old or something, her father's brother stole her father's land. And this little kid went and argued and fought, and finally, to get her out of the way, they married her off to some guy. Now, the film sort of suggests that she was raped by him and then she became a bandit because of that. No, she became a bandit like all men become bandits because she was fighting for land, And then, according to her own version, she was furious with that husband, not because he raped her, but because he sent her home and said, what am I going to do? So when she became a bandit, she returns to punish him and his wife, for humiliating her. So what I mean is that so many rapes are added, there's such a lascivious attitude masquerading as concern and feminism. There's a very old trick. I grew up in Kerala where every Malayalam film, the woman got raped, till a point where I felt I really grew up believing that every woman gets raped, and I was so furious with the fear that this instills in a young woman, you know. So all these are forms of violence, you know, making you retreat, making you fearful, turning every achievement into a humiliation, and then you're rewarded for your victimhood. So I was pleased to read that essay too after so long.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
my introduction to Arundhuti Roy. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, actually that was no, it wasn't the first essay I wrote, but
I mean,
the
it's the first
second.
one I remember.
Yeah,
I'm
it was
sure
the
there was
second.
one before.
There
but
was just one about making movies and things.
yeah,
But,
but that
yeah.
one really,
Yeah. It was.
And then, of course, one kept following you very, very closely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arundhati. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Welcome.